Well, the Bhagavad Gita is in fact one of the most widely read scriptures in India. I mean, it has been perhaps read by every Indian who calls himself an Indian, because it has a great charm about the whole book. Because you see, like many other scriptures which have been spoken by the founders of that scripture, of that religion, we have here also the great personality of Lord Krishna, who is the speaker. But then what makes this Bhagavad Gita interesting is the circumstance in which it has been given. Normally when you think of a scripture, you think the person, like for example, you have the Dhammapada, or what they have, the Tripitaka in Buddhism. They are really sayings of wisdom which have been given in an atmosphere that is quiet, meditative, withdrawn, or in an assembly of really listeners who are really quietly listening or in meditative stance. But no other scripture can equal the Bhagavad Gita in the way it has been imparted. That's what is so unique about it. I mean, imagine a scripture being created right in the middle of a battlefield. That's why it becomes not even a scripture in the usual sense of quoting a verse here or there. It is not that the Lord said and you quote a verse. Here it is almost a situational circumstance. And then these are situational in the sense, especially when there is a crisis in your life, you want to get your answers. Somebody should be guiding you. So that's what is really remarkable about this Gita, that it has been created at one of the greatest critical moments in an individual's life. And this critical moment, as all of you know here, is the Kurukshetra war. Kurukshetra war was actually precipitated by Sri Krishna himself. All of us know the story of Pandavas and Kauravas, how the two clans were eternally at loggerheads, the Pandavas leading the righteous path and the Kauravas the evil. As the story goes in the Mahabharata, when the Kauravas resisted and they did not give the Pandavas even 5 little villages for them to really live in, because as you know the story, the Pandavas were driven to the forest for long 13 years because they had lost in a game of chess. But after their return, they were promised to be given some place to live, but that also they were refused. Well, all that background apart, so that precipitated a huge war between Kauravas and Pandavas. Now the scenario is like this. The two great armies are facing each other. Even Arjuna is bloodthirsty because there's a tremendous rancor and anger in him that all these years they have had to suffer because of Kauravas. And this is the moment when he could really take revenge. So there was a tremendous anxiety in him, and he was all ready to face the war, to face the battle, and to kill all those who made them suffer. So you can imagine this tensed moment, and suddenly there is something happens in Arjuna, and he refuses to fight. So this is the opening scene when we have the first verses from the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna's despondency, his refusal to fight. A Kshatriya who becomes an ascetic, or who wants to become. So this is the crucial thing that we must understand, that somebody is changing one's own dharma. The Kshatriya dharma he is sacrificing and becoming an ascetic, which is quite anti-Kshatriya dharma. So this was the great despondency, and in that situation was born the Bhagavad Gita. That is, Sri Krishna takes over and brings wisdom to this Arjuna. So this is just the background scenario. But then The Bhagavad Gita itself, as Sri Aurobindo writes here, and I read it out from a volume called The Bengali Writings by Sri Aurobindo, a para or two I will read out, to show you the place, the greatness, the value of the Bhagavad Gita. The Gita ranks first among the world's scriptures. The knowledge that has been briefly explained in the Gita is the highest and most secret knowledge. The law of right living, dharma, propounded in the Gita includes within its scope and is the basis of all other law of right living. The way of works shown in the Gita is the eternal path for the world's march to the heights. The Gita is as if the bottomless sea. For these writings were given long before Sri Aurobindo had come to Pondicherry. In fact, they were first published in 1909 and 10, just before he came to Pondicherry. He writes, the Gita is as if the bottomless sea, the source of a myriad gems. One may spend a whole lifetime fathoming its depths and still not touch the bottom or gauge how deep it is. One may search for 100 years and still find it difficult to gather even 100th part of the riches contained in this endless store of gems. And yet, if one can recover one or two of these gems, the poor man may become rich. The deep thinker acquire wisdom. The hater of God become a devotee. The mighty and powerful hero of action come back to his field of work fully equipped and ready for achieving his life's purpose. The Gita is an inexhaustible mine of jewels. Even if the jewels are gathered from this mine for ages, the coming generations will always be delighted and astonished by their acquisitions of new and priceless ones. Such is this book, replete with deep and occult lore. And yet the language is perfectly clear. The style is simple. The surface meaning easily grasped. By simply gliding along the surf of this bottomless sea, without taking a deep plunge, there is a certain gain in strength and joy. By taking a walk around the peripheries without entering the deep recesses of this mine, illumined with jewels, there can be found strewn among the grass bright jewels which will keep us rich throughout life. The Gita may well have 1,000 commentaries, but a time will never come when a new one will not be added. There can be no such world-renowned scholar or man of deep knowledge as can write a commentary on the Gita on reading which we can say, this is enough. It will not now be necessary to add another commentary on the Gita. Everything has been grasped. So this is, of course, a part of the reading. And we see the great place that Sri Aurobindo gives to the Gita. You might have noted one thing there. He says the language is simple and the surface meaning easily grasped. That is one of the, perhaps, the dangers and illusions of reading the Gita. Because many a person in India thinks that he or she has understood the Gita. Because there is a surface meaning. It is, as it says, it gives you great strength and joy. Sometimes it gives you great solace. But at the same time, we have hardly caught anything of the Gita. It has such jewels and gems deep below that hardly anyone till now has caught them. Maybe the different commentators have gathered a few surface gems, as it says here, a few illumined jewels strewn in the garden around. But not many have been able to go deep. And although Sri Aurobindo tells us here that there can be no world-renowned scholar or man of deep knowledge whose reading can be the ultimate and the last commentary, yes, Sri Aurobindo is right on one level. That there is no scholar who can really get into the depth of the Gita. Scholarship but does not help. You may be the master of Sanskrit language, but you cannot get the meaning out of it. So we have had lots of commentaries, and then we have expositions. We have the great ones from Lokmanya Tilak, and a very popular from Mahatma Gandhi. And there are scores and scores of them. Even in the modern market you will see bookshops. Plenty of people have written. But what I would like to add here is that a scholar perhaps does not know how to go into the depth of the Gita. But a yogi and an avatar himself alone can go into the depth of the Gita. And fortunately we have an avatar who has imbibed in himself the very consciousness of Lord Krishna who had given us the Gita. The same Lord Krishna has submerged and merged himself in Sri Aurobindo to the extent that Sri Aurobindo says that there is no difference between the work of Sri Krishna and mine. This is the absolute identity of their consciousness. And therefore and thereby perhaps Sri Aurobindo was always attracted to the Bhagavad Gita even long before he came to Pondicherry. He called himself a Gita Yogin, one who followed the Gita right from the beginning. So here is an extraordinary situation again where Lord Krishna once again comes back to us in the name and form and consciousness of Sri Aurobindo to give us an explanation of his own Bhagavad Gita in the form of essays on the Gita. That's where for the first time you get the Bhagavad Gita in its true, intense, in-depth form in the essays on the Gita. So do not consider essays on the Gita one more interpretation. Because all other interpretations, they are scholars. They are mind-born. But essays on the Gita is a book that has been revealed after the identity of one's own consciousness. No wonder Sri Aurobindo saw Sri Krishna as the Vishwarupa Darshana when he was in the Alipur jail. So you can see with all this background I'm trying to build up and tell you that we here have an extraordinary book, Essays on the Gita, which was actually written in 1916 as part of the Arya. Arya began in 1914, August 15th. But Sri Aurobindo started the first essays in August of 1916, 2 years later. And then it came to a conclusion in July of 1920. So you can see within these 4 years, these 48 chapters of essays on the Gita were given out to the world. And it is only in 1922, I think, that for the first time essays on the Gita came out as a book. So this book, which is a kind of a, Sri Aurobindo too has given us his commentaries on the Vedas, on the Upanishads and on the Gita. This has been quite the tradition of the Indian acharyas. All great Indian acharyas have their commentaries on these three books. So scholastically, if I say, Sri Aurobindo did follow, not consciously perhaps, we cannot vouch for that, but we have in Sri Aurobindo the three visions of the Vedas, the Upanishads and the Gita. But all of them, each one of them is from a new angle. The Vedas from a psychological angle, Gita from a point of view of synthesis, and of course the Upanishads, he brings in again great psychological angle and metaphysical angle. So these were new interpretations, but interpretations which have been integrated into his own consciousness. That's why I'm trying to establish the authenticity of these three interpretations, which are unique in this entire creation or interpretation, entire history of interpretations. Well, here, if that is the background of the essays of the Gita, we have Sri Aurobindo himself before starting. He has given here the chapter wise, if you can see the first chapter, our demand and need from the Gita. Then we have the great avatar, the divine teacher, and then the human disciple, the core of the teaching. And we, in this series of talks, which we begin today, we will be taking up all these chapters, chapter-wise. So I'm going to highlight from each chapter the important ideas and bring out the main arguments of each chapter, like we do for the Life Divine. But at the same time, do not think it is so easy, because we have already done in the past a close study of part 2 of the Gita that I have already completed in my regular classes at the Hall of Harmony. So maybe if we are ready and we have enough time, we will bring out cassettes of those perhaps. But I'll be covering only part 1. So every darshan, February and August, I will have these 3 days for the essays on the Gita, and after darshan, the Life Divine. So this will be our rhythm. So those of you who would like to join us are welcome. But this will be the rhythm. Before darshan, essays on the Gita, and after darshan, the Life Divine, until we finished part 1 of the essays. Now there are a couple of things that we still need to clarify, couple of questions actually, because these questions I myself had when I started reading this book. You see, in this Bhagavad Gita, there are 4 things that are really important. We have first the speaker. We need to focus on the speaker. Of course, that is Lord Krishna himself. Then we have the listener, Arjuna. I'm saying this because this is what normally the listener is absent in all the other scriptures. The listener is an impersonal audience. But here we have a direct relation between the speaker and the listener. They are face to face. And an extraordinary situation when the speaker is the charioteer and the listener is the fighter. So this is a unique situation, listener, speaker, and then of course, as I started with telling you, the circumstance. Because again, this is unique with the Gita. Unlike any other scriptures, the circumstance is not given. It is wide, it is impersonal, it is no specific circumstance. But the Gita is a specific circumstance, which can be universalized, but it is there. And then we have the teaching, the content, or Aurobindo as he calls it here in the 4th chapter, the core of the teaching. So in fact, these first 4 chapters give you quite the essence of these 48 chapters of the Gita, which are totally about 700 verses. But one of the doubts that scholars have expressed is the Gita real or factual? Because some people said that Gita was a later addition to the Mahabharata. It does not make part of the Mahabharata. Because most people are puzzled as to how can such a thing happen in a battlefield. You can imagine Christ telling you something in a quiet atmosphere, giving his teachings to his disciples. Or we can have a great sermon on the mount, which is again a quiet period. Of course, there is a tension there, but it's not this kind of a battlefield. The Buddha sitting under the lovely great Bodhi tree, giving a discourse. So people say, how can it be that both the armies are waiting and somebody starts giving a lecture and a talk on the wisdom? So obviously, this cannot be part of it. Vyasa must have interpolated it later. Well, there are great many arguments for that. Because it is said, and Aurobindo supports it, that actually the Gita, the teaching that we see in the Gita, were not given for the first time in the Gita, in that period. All these teachings were already prevalent in the times of the Gita. So the argument says, as it was prevalent, then they wanted to popularize these teachings of this prevalent Gita, and then they put it as part of Mahabharata. In the Mahabharata, they form part of the chapters 25 to 42 of the Bhishma Parva. But people say even this is an interpolation. What is Sri Aurobindo's view in this? He disagrees. He says Shri Krishna was a factual truth. Mahabharata is a factual truth. And the Bhagavad Gita, the way it was given, is also a factual truth. How is it possible? Is it that there was a suspending of the war and said, both of you stop for a while, Shri Krishna is speaking now, give Arjuna some time. And to explain 700 verses is not a joke. It can take you hours on end, even days on end. So how could this happen? On one side, Sri Aurobindo says it is factual, and on the other side we see it's contradictory. Well, here there's a small para written by Sri Aurobindo which I would like to read out. That actually is the secret of the birth of the Gita. Normally, we have been told that it is sage Vyasa who gave Sanjaya the drishti, the vision, that he could see from far off what is happening in the battlefield. And it is he who reports to the great king Duryodhana. So actually, it has been said that there are three people who are witnessing the Gita, the Mahabharata war. There was Vyasa, Sanjaya, and Arjuna. But of course, Duryodhana was being told what is happening. But as all of us know, he was not only physically blind but also mentally blind. He could not really appreciate what's happening. He did not realize the greatness of the Lord. However, Sri Aurobindo writes a paragraph here which throws light on how Gita took birth. This is also from the book The Bengali Writings. 3 different powers of perception are obtained by yoga. The subtle vision, the direct spiritual awareness, and the eye of yoga. With the subtle vision, we see mental images in dream or in wakefulness. You see, through yoga, one can develop a subtle vision by which one can see mental images. I mean, what's happening, you can sort of imagine. There's a kind of a mental images. Mental images in dream. A lot of us have these images in dream. This is what I've done, gone there. But that is much more specific, because these mental images can be seen in wakefulness also. Because during the dreams, we all see images. It doesn't mean that we have a subtle vision. Of course, there is a sense of it, because there must be the subliminal, must be open in you. But then, in wakefulness also, if I sit down and I close my eyes, I should be able to see these images. That is a subtle vision. Second, by the direct spiritual awareness, we see in trance the images and symbolic figures of the names and forms belonging to the subtle and causal worlds reflected in our inner mental sky. The second one, if one develops this spiritual awareness, then Sri Aurobindo says, you should be able to see images and symbolic figures of the names and forms belonging to subtle and causal worlds. This is what is important. So if there's an advanced state of yoga wherein you can have a direct spiritual awareness and come to know, see the figures, as if we say the prophetic vision of things that are there in the subtle worlds. That is how people can predict what is going to happen, because they see the thing happening already in the subtle physical worlds. So this is the spiritual awareness. I mean, certain things, for example, we have the great prophecies by Nostradamus. We have the great prophecies in India also. So they are not yogis necessarily, but they can develop perhaps this direct spiritual awareness. So by this spiritual awareness, you get a prophetic vision, because you see the things in the subtle physical world. The last one, the eye of yoga. With the eye of yoga, we perceive the names and forms of the causal worlds in trance as well as with our physical eyes. That is the highest vision. What is it? That you see the names and forms of the causal worlds in trance as well as with our physical eyes open. So with the eye of yoga, we can see the things of the causal worlds or the supramental worlds, the overmental, the supramental world, the source. So this yogi can see things happening beyond the subtle physical itself, because we have the physical, the subtle physical levels and the causal levels. So causal, as the word itself tells you, is the place where things are caused or where they take birth. And so the eye of yoga gives you a vision of the causal worlds, the spiritual awareness of the subtle physical, and this question of the subtle vision more on the mental imagination level. So these are the things that can be developed by yoga. If that is so, Sri Aurobindo would tell us, Arjuna saw the world spirit, Vishwarupa Darshana. Arjuna saw the world spirit in the causal world, in waking state with the eye of yoga, and was delivered from doubt. This is the crucial sentence. So Arjuna did have the actual Vishwarup Darshana, this universal and the cosmic vision of the Supreme, with his eyes open. Eyes means physically, not physical eyes, but in a waking state. He was not sleeping or in a trance, and was delivered from doubt. So you can imagine now the whole scenario of the Bhagavad Gita is a transaction on this higher levels of the eye of yoga and the spiritual awareness. So it is not that necessarily that you speak one sentence, one verse, and Sri Krishna says, and then Arjuna questions again, Sri Krishna answers. So these are put into human language. But the vision and the experience are taking place on a subtle physical level, and on the causal level he sees the darshana. So all things have been contracted in time. So it is not that the 700 verses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 99 and 700. It is a vision which goes beyond the time squeeze. So that is how we can now imagine that the truth of the Bhagavad Gita is a fact. It is not an interpolated incident during the Mahabharata. So now we understand the whole scenario is a reality. Otherwise, just to always to say, oh, it is symbolic, because we have had the tendency to say, oh, Mahabharata or this Gita is more a symbolic gesture. The Lord Krishna is the God, Arjuna is the disciple, the bhakta, the soul, the circumstance is the life's battle, Kurukshetra. We can interpret it, no problem. In fact, that is where we have to take it up on the second level. But what we are establishing now in the first talk is the reality and the factuality of the Mahabharata. Well, always in a scripture, in an epic like this, there could be additions, exaggerations, symbolic stories. That is agreed upon, accepted even. But the Gita itself is verbatim truth. We do not see any reading in Sri Aurobindo which says Gita also has been mishandled or things have been taken out or added. Scholars, of course, they have always a tendency to say, no, these verses do not follow into the same language and there could be additions and all that. But that given a chance, a little bit here and there, the main experience of the Gita is an actual spiritual experience. I mean, this was a puzzle, this is a question that many a scholar has not been able to answer, and therefore they very conveniently brush it out saying it is not a fact, but it is all a symbolic story. So that established, now we will take up the actual reading of the text, and of course that we will do after a 25 minutes break.